Hello, AP. So, what we're going to talk about today is we're talking about the political concepts that came out of the Renaissance and the political struggles and intrigue that took place during this time period. So, as we've talked about, we talk about humanism, and excuse me, part of that humanism and its influence was that it has a political impact. And that's that civic humanism, the idea of a concept of government and of leadership, that the individual could control their own destiny, and that leads to political power. And so we're going to see plenty of examples in Renaissance. So we've talked about Renaissance art. Many of these extremely powerful people we're talking about are the ones that influenced it. And we talk about Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael with his School of Athens. And these are, Da Vinci's a good example of the Renaissance man in covering a wide area of thing, advisor to kings, engineer, botanist, everything, artist. Michelangelo, that idea of the humanism, the idea of the individual being important, and of course Raphael being the rock star. But you see the introduction of some science and the ideas of perspective that are being used in School of Athens. One of the major things we haven't talked about yet, though, that's going to really drive this and cause this increase of intellectualism is that when Gutenberg's printing press, the idea of movable type, that's going to really inspire a lot of the things we're talking about, because it's going to see books written in vernacular. And the fact that you have merchant class people who can afford to buy books, coupled with this introduction again of Greek and Roman ideas. So these books are back again. Aristotle, Ptolemy, Erasmus is going to be, with the scriptures. And you've got, Petrarch is publishing sonnets, and there's so much literature, and it's in the vernacular language that it's going to inspire these humanistic ideas and inspire growth during this time period. And that's going to feed both the Renaissance, because the wealthy merchants are buying these books, and then that's going to filter down as books become more and more cheaper. It's going to see an increase of literacy, which is then going to inspire the Reformation as individuals start reading the Bible, and then of course the propaganda that feeds the Reformation. Um, and so, like we said, we see all these writers. We talked about Erasmus and other writers that we talked about during this time. And this is Gutenberg's printing press. And we talked about the idea of what the Renaissance is. The medieval concept, and we're talking about politically, medieval society was fragmented. Most people only traveled no more than 25 miles from their homes. It's very church dominated and agricultural society. Whereas the Renaissance is going to be very much an industrial base or a commercial base. We're going to see trade, not industrial, sorry, commercial. We're going to see trade merchants because of the trade routes being opened with the Middle East through the Crusades, and then now through open trade. We see urban areas, not rural agriculture areas, but urban areas. There's also a political centralization taking place in other countries. If Italy is divided, we're going to see that in Germany, what is going to become Germany, right now the Holy Roman Empire, is divided. That's not the case of what you're seeing in France, in Spain, and in England, as you see very strong monarchs using the Machiavellian concepts we've talked about in class of pulling these countries together, whether it's the Tudors in England, the Valois in France, or Ferdinand and Isabella in Spain. We're going to see this idea of pulling power together. We're also seeing an increase of secular and lay concepts in government. So, and we talked about the revival of Greek ideas. These are some of the writers we talked about already: Pizan, Castillon, all right. So, and we talked about Machiavelli in class, and you're going to see these things being tied in this lecture. So let's do this. And we talked about Machiavelli and the Prince. All right. So this is the real driving thing. Italy is not one given concept. It's not a unified area. As you can see, it's divided. And the main form of government in these areas were the city states. So you have Milan, you have Florence, you have Venice, you have the Papal States, and all of these had different types of governments. In the case of Florence, it was a republic, but it was basically controlled by the Medicis, who used their wealth and power to manipulate them. Others had despots that ruled them. Some had oligarchies of the merchants that ran them. Obviously, in the Papal States, the Pope ran these areas. So it's a very divided, non centralized governmental system. And these city states then allowed for flexibility. So the very thing that's going to make these areas great is also the thing that's going to lead to their demise in the end of the Renaissance. So let's talk about this. So the Italian city states, like we said, they're very much these independent little areas. There's these social strifes and competition between them and political issues. There's wealth being flown in the ideas of trade, and you have the banking commerce. And as we see, we have the Florentine bankers with Medici's, and what defended the cities were basically mercenary forces. The condottieri, which is these merchant forces that were bought and sold. But here's the thing, that separation of powers, this idea that each one of these city states is independent and can operate itself, is what allowed the Renaissance to happen. The lack of centralized power throughout France allowed for the flow of money and the flow of wealth and the flow of new ideas. And that's going to create the thing that inspires the Renaissance, that each town could then find its own path, and it wasn't governed by one person who could put its finger on and crush or guide it. So this is Renaissance Florence. This is the Medici's, all the art. This is Lorenzo and Cosimo de Medici, who are two of the most powerful, who inspired both the arts and controlled politics and the Pope, and their wealth was phenomenal. So you have these independent city states that basically can set their own course and do what they want and how they want to do it. But there's rivalries in there. So the thing that makes them great, that independence, is also the very thing that's going to cause its demise. Because what happens is they let the tiger in. Is that the Charles the Eighth, as you see here, is going to be invited in by the rulers of Milan, Mario, who want to weaken Naples. So they basically invite them in. And because of this, you have this outside invader then. Well, the problem, once you let the tiger in, it doesn't mean the tiger's just going to eat Naples. It's then going to turn and eat you. So the French, who invaded to take out Naples, then turn their sights towards Papal States and towards Florence. We see the rise of states coming together in the idea of the League of Venice. We also see that because of this appeasement that happens, is that there's corruption and wealth, and it opened the door that Florence wasn't able to be controlled by the Medici's like it always had been. I see the beginning of a radical religious leader named Savonarola, who basically criticizes the art and the decadence that the Florentines had developed during the Renaissance, of all this art and everything. And he's going to push back and cause religious crushing ideas and control. This is where the term the bonfires, the vanities, that he says all this art and everything is vanities. And so he polices it by burning it. And people were being arrested and burned at the stake and drove from the city because they weren't saying the right words, or because they had wealth, or they wore furs. And that this vanity of art and secularism is pushed back. And this is because the trade started to dry up. When the trade started to dry up because of these wars, that's what kind of kills the Renaissance, is that they stopped being what they were, is that the Florentines and the people in Milan and these other city states, they're so trying to just survive the wars and stuff that are coming in from this open invasion by the French, that they stopped being enlightened and humanistic, and they allowed people like Savonarola to come in and destroy that culture of awakening and ideas that had been in the Renaissance. So when the wars happen, crops fail, and the economy starts drying up because trade is stopping because of the wars. That opened the door for people like Savonarola, who, by the way, is eventually removed by the Pope and excommunicated and burned at the stake for heresy because he challenges the Pope. But in the process, it weakened and destroyed those Renaissance ideas. They just stopped being the Renaissance. So, and then that's going to continue. There's a huge line of these wars. You're going to have the Borgia family, which is, the corrupt families of Alexander the Fourth. You're going to then see another invasion of Milan, and they take back parts of Milan and Naples. And then there's another invasion by the French, and the Pope drives them out. Francis the First, who we're going to talk about later, is going to be the third invasion during this time period in 1547. And that under Francis, in Francis's time, is where you see kind of the end of the Italian Renaissance. Is that when Francis ends up marching in and capturing the Vatican and capturing the Pope, that's kind of the end of the Renaissance and this Renaissance arts and things. But it was the wars, the rivalry is what created the Renaissance. That I've got the best paintings and I've got the best statues and I've got all the wealth, and those families like the Borgias and the Medicis competing with each other for the wealth and the decorations and the paintings and the statues, that allowed the Renaissance to take place. The openness, the lack of a centralized power, but the lack of a centralized power also caused competition. And without the lack of a central power to keep people like the Valois and the Habsburgs out, the Spanish and the French, this turns into an entire warfare between these city states and the outside invaders, and eventually it causes the corruption and the decadence and the falling apart, and they just basically stop being the Renaissance because there was just too much just trying to survive. At the same time, all this is coming, that lack of structure is what's causing the Renaissance. In other areas, the creation of structure is actually unifying nations and making them strong. Prime example you're going to see is in France. You're going to see Charles and Louis de Valois are going to work on reducing the power of nobles and strengthening the power of court. And so they're going to reduce the land holdings and basically put France underneath the Valois power. We're also going to see the marriage of Isabel and Ferdinand of Castile, Isabel of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, and they're going to, if in France, they're doing it by eliminating the power of the nobility and strengthening the power of the monarchy. In Spain, they're going to do it by creating unification in culture. They're going to use the wealth from obviously exploration, because Ferdinand and Isabella are the ones who are going to go out and send, well, Isabel is the one who sends out the fleets and then settles the New World and bring back vast wealth. But they're also going to centralize Spain in the form of Christianity by what we call the Reconquista. The Reconquista is the pushing of Jews and Muslims out of the country and creating a single unified state, which was a great idea. I know that sounds terrible because it was a terrible thing. Many of these Muslims and Jews were tortured and killed, and they were forced either into, in the case of Jewish populations, were forced out into Central and into Eastern Europe. But in the case of the Moors, the Muslims, they're pushed into North Africa, back into places like Algeria and Morocco. It's a horrible concept, but it did unify everyone in the country around one concept of a Catholic monarchy. The negative aspect was that these were some of the most educated people, besides being immensely racist. That's a negative aspect. But these are some of the most educated people that were in Spain, and some of the most thrift. They had the most money. They were the thrifty businessmen who were coming up with new trade routes and new trades and things like that. And so, with the Muslims and the Jewish population being removed from the country, there's a huge decline in the economics. Even though you've got the wealth coming from the New World, that merchant class has been pushed out. So eventually, the wealth out of the New World is going to dry up, and then there's no merchant class to take its place in Spain. So, and then Namor, this is Charles VII. We've seen him on the other slides. He's the one, the idea of strengthening France by outside invasions. And we talked about Ferdinand and Isabella. In England, you're going to see the same kind of thing, that there were two families, the Lancasters and the Yorks, who had fought over control of the throne. Both are going to go at each other in what we call the War of the Roses in 1455, when Richard III dies in the battle. He gets an arrow in the eye, and that pretty much ends that whole thing. And then, Richard had dubiously taken the throne anyways by killing off his two nephews. And so without someone on the throne, the Tudors then take control of it. So in Spain, you're going to see the centralization by religion around the monarchy. In France, it is this weakening of the power of the nobility by taking land and titles, but also that they're going to create a network of control and spies. They create a bureaucracy that is controlled by the monarchy. In England, they're going to do something similar, but they're going to create this thing called the Star Chamber, because obviously the the rules of Magna Carta said that nobility had to face a trial of their peers. Well, the king then doesn't want a public trial, so what he does is he uses the Star Chamber. So this is Henry VII. This is the grandfather of Henry VIII. And so what he does is he uses the Star Chamber as his own private little court. So if a noble were to offend him, or if he wanted to take their land and titles without due process, he could force them into the Star Chamber, which he then could use as his own way of politically manipulating things and gaining power. So if I want more land, I want more titles, I just simply eliminate the noble that is offending me, and then I take their land and titles. Or if someone looks like they're plotting against me, I can pull them into the Star Chamber and do this secret trial thing. So they're weakening the noble. So in Spain, in France, and England, they're weakening the power of the nobilities. In Spain, they're centralizing the religion around the monarchy. The problem is, though, we have another Italy. The Holy Roman Empire is neither holy nor Roman nor empire. It is all these princes with 300 autonomous entities that are under Charles the Fourth and other Holy Roman emperors, and they have this Reichstag that's this kind of weak introduction. Like they can go there and discuss things, and they don't really have to like do anything. And so you're going to see this weak centralized, non-centralized government that basically is a hotbed of things. So in the Renaissance case, that weakness of the divided states created the wealth and power and the art and the humanism in Spain or in Italy. And that also is going to be its demise. It's going to come apart because of that. That rivalry is going to allow for people like the Habsburgs and the Valois to capitalize on it and destroy the Renaissance and divide Italy until 1870s. The same thing happens in Germany. Even though it has an emperor, the emperor can't control this thing. It's a box of cats. They're all over the place. They're out of control. And so that lack of control means that the ideas of religious reform and religious change are going to start festering because of that printing press that comes out. And you're going to see that's what brings Martin Luther, and that's what brings the Reformation, is that division in Germany. And what has become Germany, the Holy Roman Empire, sets this up for what's coming in the Reformation. So in England, France, Spain, you see centralization and growing power. But in Italy and in the Holy Roman Empire, the division is going to cause huge amounts of change. So hopefully this helped you a little bit explain this, and we'll talk more about it in class.